I know that you guys here are what we call FOGIs, Friends of Jim Inhofe. And that's what we do when I land my airplane. We always have, we try to get a good crowd of people that are the ones in the trenches, that are the real believers. And that's what you are, whether you like it or not. 2 more chairs over here. I'm not going to talk to somebody sits there. And 3 more over there. We're going to have seats for everybody. Yeah. What I'd like to do is just share a couple of thoughts with you, and of things that are happening and things that are going to happen. I know there are Democrats and Republicans here, but I can tell you there's no one here who's a Democrat who would be a Democrat if you're in Washington. It's some things are happening right now, and what I'm not going to do is tell you about the things that you already know. Everyone talks about Obamacare. It's bad. Socialized medicine doesn't work, and I've often said, and I said this back when Hillary had her Hillary Health Care back in 1992, I guess it was, and we defeated it. And I said, I remember saying this to her. We had a forum. I said, if socialized medicine doesn't work in Canada, it doesn't work in the UK, it doesn't work in Sweden, why would it work with you? Now, they'll never admit this, but what they're going through their mind is, well, if I were running it, it would work. And that's what their thinking is. It's a very arrogant thing, but that's what they're doing. Of course, the epitome of that would be our president, Obama, because he is, really, really far out in left field on these things. So, anyway, the 3 things I wanted to mention to you that are distressing, and I don't mean to distress the comfortable, because if you're comfortable now, you haven't been paying attention. But the 3 things that I'm involved in as your United States Senator, as you know, in the Senate, you're kind of a product of your committees. And I have seniority on 2 committees. One is the Senate Armed Services Committee, where I'm the ranking member, and the other is Environment and Public Works, which doesn't sound very significant, but that's where if you talk to your farmers out here and your ranchers, and you talk to Tom Buchanan with the Oklahoma Farm Bureau, and ask him where the greatest problem is facing, it's nothing in the Farm Bill. It's the overregulation by the EPA, what they're doing in your containers and on your on your farms, and what you're doing with your water and all that type of thing, the overregulation. People don't realize that how costly that is. And of course, the regulation of all regulations, which is the worst regulation, the largest one, is cap and trade. And you remember 12 years ago, I was the bad guy that was willing to take on global warming. And I don't know where it is when you need it. I mean, we've been setting records in Oklahoma. I gave 2 global warming speeches on the floor of the Senate this week. It's kind of fun. But anyway, you can't get to the Al Gore type people. They want to believe the world's coming to an end, and it doesn't make any difference what the circumstances are. But cap and trade was something they tried to do with legislation. And the first the bill was not all Democrats, because it was John McCain. McCain-Lieberman, remember that? That was the first cap and trade bill. And on the floor, we were able to get from the Wharton School and from several of the universities what the cost was of this thing. And the cost range was between $300 and $400 billion a year. Now, what I always do, because since people, the eyes get dilated when you start talking about trillions and billions of dollars, I always get the total number of Oklahomans each year that file and pay federal income tax, and then I do the math. On that would cost the average taxpayer in Oklahoma $3,000 a year, and you get nothing for it. And for those of you, and I know you're in here, who believe in CO2 causing global warming, even if you believe that, which I don't, it by their own admission, if you restrict CO2, it's not going to cut down worldwide CO2 emissions, because they admit that this isn't where the problem is. It's in China and in India and in Mexico and all that. But we're the ones who would be paying for it. Well, anyway, I tell you that story because they've had, for 12 years, they've had bills. We've defeated all of them because they can't convince the people that it's worth the cost. So what Obama's doing now is doing through regulation what he couldn't do through legislation. And you hear about the imperial presidency. This is where it's coming from. because they couldn't get it passed by people who are elected up there, so he's doing it through regulation. And he's actually moving forward. You talk about all the fiscal problems we have right now, in spite of the fact that he's just gutted our military. The reason is, the first thing he did was $800 billion stimulus. Remember that? None of that went to, only 3% of that went into roads and highways. It's all his little programs. The food stamps, the increase. We're paying $41 billion a year more now in food stamps than we paid when he took office. So all these things, that's where the cost is, and that's where the problem is. But the regulation is a serious problem. I'll mention just one thing about, two other things. We would be in a position to be totally independent of any other country in terms of our ability to run our country energy if we just would open up federal lands to the same kind of increase that we've had in private lands and state lands. We've increased our production in America with all the type formations by about 40%. However, on federal land, it's decreased by 15%. And that's what he is doing with the far left environmentalists who think that the world's coming to an end if you drill for oil, gas, or coal. So, in fact, Harold Hamm. How many people know who Harold Hamm is? Yeah, you should out here, because he was from this general area. He is arguably the most successful independent producer right now in America, and he's doing a lot of stuff up in the Dakotas and other places. I called him up one day. There's MSNBC has a gal named Rachel Maddow. Now, any of you ever listened to Rachel Maddow? Good, you haven't. I listen all the time. I want to know what the other side's doing, so I'm on there. I'm the only Republican who's willing to go on her show, and I don't mind it at all, because even though her audience is on the other side, there are a lot of people like you and me who watch it to see what the other side's doing. Well, anyway, Obama had been saying, and still saying today, that if Inhofe, you're wrong. You used my name one time on this. If we were to open up federal lands for production, it'd be 10 years before that would reach the economy. So I called up Harold Hamm. I said, Harold, I want to ask you a question, and be careful the way you answer it, because I'm going to use you on nationwide TV tonight by name. If you were able to move into an area that had been off limits in New Mexico or someplace, how long would it take your first barrel of oil to reach the economy? He said 70 days. He never hesitated. And then he told me each week what would happen to you. Well, that's 70 days, not 10 years. And so I used it that night. Not one person has challenged that since then. But Obama keeps saying 10 years. So that's a problem that we can just overcome. And unfortunately, it's a partisan thing. We have a Republican House and a Democrat Senate. And so we can't get this stuff through the Senate. But as soon as all this changes, then we'll be able to do that. The last thing I mentioned should have been first, and that is what he's doing to the military. In his first budget, I know liberals don't think they need a military to start with. In his first budget, I remember so well, I went to Afghanistan so I could respond to his budget message knowing that they'd give me coverage nationwide, and it worked with the tanks going back and forth and all of that. In the first budget, he did away with our only with the F-22, the only fighter that we had at that time that was superior, did away with our lift capacity, that's a C-17, did away with the Future Combat System, did away with the ground-based interceptor that we had going in Poland to protect our East Coast. And that was just in his first budget. Since then, he has taken $487 billion out of the military, and it's getting worse. So right now, it really is disarming America. You don't hear that from anybody because it's not believable. People just don't believe that can happen. You keep hearing we got the greatest military. Well, we got a great military, but we got a great responsibility. And right now, we have a hollow force. For those of you who might remember reading about during the Carter administration, we had a hollow force. That's what we got today. And it's getting worse. In fact, I carry a quote with me because people aren't going to believe me, but they will believe General Dempsey because he's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of the Staff. He said, we're putting our military on a path where where the force is so degraded and so unready that it would be immoral to use force. This is America. This is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. But people kind of, their eyeballs dilate and they just don't believe it. Winnefeld is the vice chief of the Joint. He said, there could be, for the first time in my career, instances where we may be asked to respond to a crisis and we will have to say we cannot. So those happy three little things are my little missions, and I'd be glad to respond to any questions you have or anything you want to talk about.
What about the federal debt?
Well, see, that's the thing. We just had, the last vote we had was to increase the debt limit. And I went on record, it's been 15 years ago now, saying I'm never going to vote to increase the debt limit. Until you get a majority of people who say that, they'll totally ignore it and go through this deficit stuff that we're going through right now. And it's, then a panic sets in. They say, well, we can't default and all this stuff. But until we take a hard line stand, that's going to happen. So they voted to increase the debt limit. In fact, they didn't even put a lid on it this time.
How about
I'm sorry.
The shipping of crude oil by rail? We're seeing rumbles that states or others may put regulations on that. What do you think on that?
I don't think there's a problem there. I really don't. Our problem is in producing it. I mean, obviously we're doing really great on private land and on state land, but that's the thing we're focusing on right now because we've been in pretty good shape on that. For a while, there's an effort to stop shipping by truck and rail with the idea. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about MoveOn.org, George Soros, Michael Moore, all the far left Hollywood elites. In order to try to stop oil in its shipment, they're talking about the danger of all this. Well, I think we've overcome that now. So that the problem is opening it up, not moving it. That was a problem.
I'd like to let you know I appreciate your support of the aviation medical bill. Like I said it before recently.
Yes, it did. But taking on a bureaucracy, you guys think you know how tough that is. You really don't. I mean, the FAA is a good example. You and I were talking before people arrived about the problems right now with the FAA and what you're doing with your I call them parallel runways. They don't. But when I introduced and passed the Pilot's Bill of Rights, that was a huge deal. And they had over 100 of their bureaucrats lobbying against me in the Senate. And I couldn't get Jay Rockefeller as the chairman of that committee. Jay Rockefeller would not hold a hearing for almost a year. And I hate to say something nice about Harry Reid, but I have to. I went to Harry and I said, Harry, Harry, I've had this bill. I now have 67 co-sponsors out of 100 senators, and I can't get a hearing. And he said, let's just go down to the floor and we'll bypass the committee and pass it. And he and I went down to the floor and passed it in the Senate, went over the next day and passed it in the House, and is now, the president was not going to sign it, but we had so much pressure from the aviation community through AOPA, EAA, and the other organizations that we got it done. So we now are, I'm putting together the Pilot's Bill of Rights number 2, and we're going to introduce it at Oshkosh this year.
I also appreciate your support of forcing the FAA to go through the rulemaking process on the state avenue issue as well.
Yeah, see, a lot of them are not into these issues, and actually it's not many senators are either. And so, I've been flying for a long time. Let me tell you about my open heart surgery. Anyone here had open heart surgery? Huh? Just one? Is that all? Oh. Well, anyway, if you know of anyone who's going to have open heart surgery, have them call me. It's a piece of cake. There's nothing to it. I went in. I'm going to tell you a true story. You know what? I hate to say this. You know what a colonoscopy is. Yeah, everybody has to have it when you're a certain age, every 5 years or so. So I was going to go in, and Tom Stafford, you remember Tom Stafford, our astronaut from Oklahoma? He's a great guy. He's really up in years now, but he comes up, and we visit every time he comes into town. He's been a good friend for a long time. And he was going to come in town, and he called my office. And Wendy said, well, he's going to be out today or tomorrow because he's having a colonoscopy. And it's a general anesthetic. And he said, no, tell them to have a virtual colonoscopy, and that you don't have to have any anesthetic at all. They just fill you full of water and run you through the tube, and it not only it takes pictures of the gut and the things you need to be looking at, but also everything else in your body. So I went ahead and did this. This was in Washington, in Bethesda Hospital. And the doctor looked at that and he came out and said, well, I have good news and bad news. The good news is your colon's fine. The bad news is you can't live another 7 days. I had total blockage, 100% blockage in 2 arteries, 90% in 2 others, and 75% in the rest. He said, you can't last. You got to do it right now. And I had 4 bypasses. Now, nothing to it. And in fact, I was in the hospital. I came back and did it in Tulsa because I thought if something happened, I've got 20 kids and grandkids in Tulsa, so I didn't want to be there. And after the third day I'd been in the hospital, I have property up in Delaware County, and the rains were coming, so I wanted to mow it all. And I snuck out of the hospital and went up and mowed all my fields. And that was after 3 days. I can remember it used to be 3 months you'd be in the hospital. So if anyone has any those operations come along, have them call me. I'll make life easier. I forgot what your question is, but that's the answer. Hey, by the way, those who believe, as I do, that the Republicans are going to have to take over the United States Senate, let me give you good news. That's going to happen. Now, I would take my list out of my pocket, I have it with me here, and tell you which 9 seats are there, of which we'll get 8 out of those 9. But if I do that, then I go back to Washington, and because not that you're here, even if you weren't here, anything I say is going to be, this is the information age. And so everyone's going to, I'll tell you a story. I mentioned Tom Stafford a minute ago. He's from Weatherford. Who's been to Weatherford to the Tom Stafford Museum? It's one of the best kept secrets in Oklahoma. And so I stopped there for 2 reasons with my plane. One, it's the cheapest gas in Oklahoma. And the other is I'd like to see what he's done with this. They change this museum all the time. And I'm going to tell you a true story. This happened 6 years ago when I was up for re-election. Real close to it was during the summertime, and I happened to be flying that particular plane out there, that twin engine. I was alone on that day, and I went in, and I know the manager of most of the airports around. Certainly, I did in Weatherford, and we visited, and I went off and did my thing. And I came back at 6:00 at night, and the airport manager said, "Well, Inhofe, come over here. We have a student from Southwestern University who's doing research here in the museum." "Oh, you're a student." I said, "You must be a far left-wing, extreme liberal Democrat." And he said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "Don't worry, you'll outgrow it." Now, that's 6:00 at night. The next morning, at 6:00 in the morning, the guy I was on the phone talking to in Washington, who was my chief of staff, called me up and he said, "What did you do in Weatherford last night?" And he had the whole thing right there. And there were only 2 people in the airport. And they were running that and saying Inhofe doesn't care about the price of fuel in cars because he flies airplanes, something like that. Okay. Anyway, there are a lot of races, and that's going to make a huge difference. And one of the other problems is this: you don't have of the 9 endangered species incumbent Democrat senators. They're all trying to act like Republicans right now because they know that they're in trouble. And we used to have a House member that was represented the eastern part of Oklahoma named Mike Sinar. Remember Mike? He's deceased now. He was very liberal, but we were good friends. And I asked him one day, I said, "Mike, I don't understand this. You're from a very conservative state, and you vote right down the line with the far left. How do you do that? How do you get by with it?" He said, "Oh, it's easy, and all you do is vote liberal and press release conservative." Okay? Now, I would ask you, this is dead proof that we're right and they're wrong. Have you ever in your entire life or read in the history of America where anybody voted conservative and press release liberal? What does that tell you? It tells you that we're right and they're wrong. That's what it tells you. So anyway, we had, I'm glad you brought that up, that took place. The other good thing, and this is something that I think they accidentally goofed up in their in the budget deal that was made by a Democrat and Republican, Paul Ryan and Patty Murray, had quite a bit of publicity. And when they did that, it was let's see. You heard about what they did to the retirement on military in that they cut the retirement by 1% a year after 20 years. That would mean for an E3 who has been retired after 20 years, $83,000 taken out of his retirement. I don't think they actually knew. I think that was staff-driven, and they probably didn't know about it. And, of course, we corrected that just the day before yesterday, the last vote that we voted before coming in. In case some of you, I've always been sensitive to these things because I've always been the only veteran in the Oklahoma delegation, so I seem to be more involved in these things. So that was a little bit of good news. All right, questions?
That same bill, Senator Inhofe, there was talk of improving reservist and National Guard retirements, and that didn't make it through. Do you have any input on that? For example, my husband's a retired Air Force, and he'll be 60-something before he can actually draw that retirement.
Uh-huh. No, that was not affected by that. That was not in the budget deal that the two I mentioned put together.
It was the time before. It was tied to it, and when it all didn't pass, it didn't pass too.
It did not.
I was hoping it got in.
No.
Okay.
No, nothing really good happened there except what I just mentioned.
Okay.
All right, questions, you guys? I'm not out here every day.
I have a question.
Yes.
We have a son, and unfortunately, he still lives in Kansas. But he was serving in the military. He was over in Iraq, and he's had some injuries. Is the VA as incompetent in Oklahoma and everywhere else as it is in Kansas?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Can we do anything about that?
Well, no, yeah, you can. What it takes is really close supervision. Now, when I was in the House, of course, my district was the eastern part of the state. Muskogee was the big veterans, and I would go down there. I bet at least once a month to answer complaints that people had, either waiting too long, not being able to get prescriptions, and all these things that you're aware of. And we cleaned that up pretty well. But it shouldn't be necessary to have an elected official have to go in once every month just to correct it. We ended up actually changing a lot of the personnel there and cleaning it up. Now, I don't know. I'll tell Pat Roberts up in Kansas he needs to get busy. All right.
Okay. Well, Jeff has been with Tim Huelscamp's office, and they've been trying to help. But you turn around, and like you said, if they're not right there on them, it's just awful.
Well, I know that's true, and I know some of the stories that are there.
Thank you.
Okay. Welcome. You're late. You were late when you worked for me, too. You're as bad as Kale. Yeah.
Something never changed.
Yeah, that's right. Question. You were pointing. Yes, sir.
We need wind towers and pipelines and less regulations.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry about the prairie chicken, but we tried every way in the 60s to cook them. And
they're not bad. They really aren't. That's one of the big problems that we've got with endangered species, not just the prairie chickens. Right. As you know, the lesser prairie chicken is one that we've had. We had the guy from Fish and Wildlife, Dan Ash. Yeah, out here. I guess it was in Woodward, wasn't it? It was close to that. Wasn't far from here. And he's been trying to help us on this. He really has. And I think that we're making some headway. As you know, Kansas, New Mexico, Texas, and Oklahoma are all having the same problems. Now, as far as the prairie chicken is concerned, that affects, wind, drilling, construction, road construction, and all of that. If you get into the extreme liberals, they care more about critters than they do people. And, some things are going to go, the species are going to die off. I mean, that's part of, God's still up there. And that's happening. Yes, sir.
Senator, thanks for coming, and thanks for all your work on transportation and then also on the endangered species and the reauthorization bill, what you did as far as being able to work on those bridges and stuff.
Exactly,
All right,
yeah.
But I wanted to, you know Representative Hickman, but I don't know if you're aware Representative Hickman was just elected Speaker.
I'm very aware of that, and I was getting around to it. You're spoiling my. No, I think that's great, and I hope that everyone here knows how significant that is. You have the Speaker of the House, and gosh, when I was in the House, when I was pretty young at that time, I wasn't even able to have a conversation with Rex Privet, who was Speaker of the House. He wouldn't talk to a Republican. Now we got a Republican. So congratulations.
Senator, he's also a former Boren staffer, and I know you got some. You guys served together in the House.
Sure. Well, Dan Boren with David.
At the university.
Oh, okay. That's right. Yeah, we did, and David and I were real close. Way back at the time, he was a Democrat in the House, I was a Republican in the Senate in the state of Oklahoma. We introduced all of the reform legislation. None of it passed. But we're the ones who introduced it all. So we've been good friends for a long time. Well, that's really exciting. Had a pretty close race there, though.
They always are.
Yeah, sure they are. Well, that's good.
Unless you're right, then they're never close.
No, that's not true. It's not true. Yeah. Well, Bryce, when you talk about transportation, where's the handouts that we have? I don't want you to take them now, but when you leave, will you take a handout? Because I'm still ranked as the most conservative member of the United States Senate. That one there, it was I'm number 5, but if you read further, it was number 1. And I say that because I believe we need to spend money in certain areas. If you read the Constitution, it says that the 2 things we're supposed to be doing in Washington are defending America and roads and highways. That's what the Constitution says. And so I spend big in those areas. And we have a lot of Democrats, or a lot of demagogues, I should say, on the Republican side, who won't vote for a highway reauthorization bill. And yet, I don't want to get in the weeds with this thing, but you know very well that that's the conservative position. Because if you don't do that, then you have to operate on extensions, 6-month or 3-month or 12-month extensions. And that costs about 30% more. So one of the things we need to do a better job of is in our infrastructure. And so I'm always the author of the hopefully we'll get one passed this year. In fact, we have to because it expires in, I think, September.
Will you be the chairman in January?
Yeah. And that's going to be kind of fun. Now, I'll let you in on this. This is your scoop for the day. All right. I'm the ranking member on the Armed Services Committee. Now, the ranking member is the minority party. The one who is the same as the chairman is the majority party. So the chairman and ranking member. Well, I'm the ranking member. Now, you'd assume then, when we take over control, that I'll become the chairman. Well, I won't become the chairman of Armed Services because John McCain has seniority over me, and so he will become that. I will become the chairman of the committee that you work so closely with, the EPW committee, that Barbara Boxer is the chairman of now. And just 2 days ago, in a hearing that we had with Barbara Boxer, she loves to hold the gavel and try. I said, don't hold too tight to that gavel because you're going to lose it. Just in 8 more months, I'm going to be holding the gavel. And I reached over and grabbed it up there. And this is on TV. I thought maybe you might have seen it. But it's going to be fun because that committee, that's in charge of all the energy, the problems that we had. I'm going to, I think, the lunch days with the natural gas people in it. And I've been carrying that legislation for a long period of time. And of course, when you chair this committee, it's going to make it that a lot easier. That, transportation, all the over-regulations. And you talk to your farmers and they'll tell you, I think it was before you came in, I mentioned that if you talk to Tom Buchanan with Oklahoma Farm Bureau, he'll tell you the most serious problem that farmers have, not just in Oklahoma, but throughout America, is the over-regulation by the EPA. And that's the problem we have.
Back to the FAA.
Yes.
There is a proposal bouncing around letting a driver's license replace the third-class medical certificate.
That's already there.
Has that passed?
Mm-hmm. That's the sports. What's that called, Carl? The sports.
But they're talking about for private pilots also.
would allow you to fly an airplane up to 6,000 pounds gross vehicle weight, 250 knots, 6 seats on a driver's license.
Yeah, so you don't have to have a pilot's license. But I think they're talking about expanding that beyond that, and that's what.
It hit the House floor yesterday with 36 co-sponsors.
Yeah, so that's in the making. Now you could have people argue about it. The problem is there's nothing wrong with having to have the right certificates and all that, except it's the FAA that are making these determinations. You know the reason that I introduced. You probably know the reason I introduced the Pilot's Bill of Rights, because I was stopped down in just by Brownsville, Texas, way down south, landing on a runway that was supposedly closed, but it didn't show up in any of the NOTAMs. It was closed, and they actually tried to take my license away from me. And I thought, what a helpless feeling it is to have no legal recourse and have one bureaucracy deciding whether or not you can fly an airplane. And that's why I passed the legislation. Now, they still hate me for it. So I'm not, a bureaucracy is a bureaucracy. They're all the same. Okay, you guys. Yes?
There was talk at one time about bringing all our soldiers back from Afghanistan this year. Is that what's going to happen?
No. In Afghanistan, they're talking about taking back, right now, leaving a minimum of 10,000 there. Now, if you leave any less than that, you don't have the force protection for the ones who are left there, and you have to leave some there. Look at what happened in Iraq. In Iraq, he pulled everybody out, and what we needed was to leave our intelligence and surveillance there, and they wouldn't be having the problems they're having today. We tried to tell them at that time that was a presidential decision. That will not be the case in Afghanistan. But things are really going. I just got back from Afghanistan just last week, and things are really going better than you would normally read about or see on TV. The kids there, they'll tell you that they're working with the Afghan National Army, the ANA, and they are doing a really remarkable job. It's our 45th that actually started training them a long time ago, back in about 03. The Oklahoma 45th was, and they'll tell you, you talk to one of those guys, and they'll tell you that these are great fighters, and they are standing up to the terrorism there. And a lot of people wonder why we're still there. You got to keep in mind that's the Taliban. They're the ones that are there today. And I hope you saw what happened last week when a guy named James Clapper came before our committee, because it got a lot of national attention. Anyone remember this? It was just last week. James Clapper is the Director of National Intelligence. He is was nominated by and answerable to the President. And yet, when I asked the question live on TV in this committee hearing about, the President keeps saying that the Taliban, they're on the run, Al Qaeda, the Taliban, and all that, and they're not in the Middle East anymore. Do you believe that? And he said, absolutely not. And this was the Director of National Intelligence who is answerable to the President. And so all of these great, people now realize, and people who are working for the President, like even the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the CIA Director, they're all admitting that we have a more serious problem. I got to tell you this, and you may not like this. The guy, Stevens, who was the ambassador who was killed in Benghazi, was a good friend of mine. In fact, he was in my office right before he deployed, and he was talking about how dangerous it was in that whole region. And I can tell you exactly how many times they appealed to the White House to get help out there. One was on the 9th of September, just 2 days before the Benghazi attack. And he was asking for some. He said, "It's an attack's coming probably on the anniversary of the bombing," and the President would not. He had ordered them to stand down. That's a military term. Don't go, and they didn't. And 4 people unnecessarily died. And we knew at that time that it was an organized terrorist attack. Now, if you'll remember, Susan Rice was sent by the President to the Sunday shows 5 days after this happened to say it was not an organized terrorist attack. It was due to some video. That was an outrageous lie. And I'm familiar and have read about all the famous cover-ups in America. the Pentagon Papers, the Iran-Contra, Watergate, and all the rest of them. This will go down in history as the most egregious cover-up in history because it killed 4 people. And it was all done just because before the election, he wanted to make the people of America think that there's no longer a problem in the Middle East with terrorism. Sounds a little extreme, but that's what happened. Okay, you guys. Yes.
I got just follow up on that. Where's the accountability on the executive branch? I mean, they've got the Benghazi and then the IRS scandal, and they said there's absolutely no truth to that. Now we get members of Congress calling on the IRS to shut down conservative groups and key areas where swing states and swing districts.
Yeah.
Well, is there ever going to be anything that can be done?
All you can do. The problem you have is, with the exception of Fox and a bunch of talk shows, it's controlled by the far left, the media, and so they won't tell you that. What I just told you about Benghazi is the gospel truth, and they will lie and say no, that isn't true. Carl,
you missed Fox News this morning because you got up to the airport early, but they were saying that. The Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, they had 8 meetings with Obama explaining the problems with the web-based enrollment.
Yeah.
And he knew about it, and it's now documented, and the man's a liar.
Yeah, he is. He's extremely persuasive, and I was never so wrong in my life as I was last November, a year ago November, at the election. Up until 7 o'clock that night, I thought the American people will not re-elect a person who has a disdain for every institution that's made America great. It's not going to happen. And it happened. And I had that wrong all the way. And he is persuasive. He's talented. But, whatever you're thinking, it's worse than that. Okay, you guys.
I've always appreciated your support of the military. My brother served, and my wife is retired military physician, both in internal medicine and psychiatry. And the Army, being short psychiatrists, put her in that category during this time of the Iraq.
Well, see, you're familiar then with all the drawdowns and what's happening.
One of the things I'd request that you pay attention to when you have time is that as being a psychiatrist, a lot of her support staff is psychologists, mainly doctors of psychology, coming into the military. After they serve their initial commitment, they're leaving in droves because they cannot earn enough money in the military to pay off their education bills and still support their family.
I know that's true, and I'll tell you what else is true. If you take pilots, this will shock a lot of you here because it's not all that believable. But you know what it costs to get a pilot, to train a pilot from the very beginning all the way to the proficiency level of an F-35. The cost is $15 million. Now, the problem we're having with the Obama administration, they have furloughed all these pilots, and a lot of them are leaving, and it only costs, and they took away their reenlistment bonuses. Their bonuses to reenlist are $25,000. $25,000 to retain, $15 million to retrain. And that's kind of in the weeds, but that's how serious this problem is.
And they have the same problem with medical staff. They are not competitive with what we call the average in the areas that the bases are, and they lose specialists, and again, that they pay for the schooling,
that's
things
right.
like that. They're leaving in droves. The veterans, returning soldiers, are having a hard time, and families getting the medical care they need on basis.
Well, it's true, and it's all branches. Probably a little less in the Navy than it is in the rest of the branches. But the Army, and now they're talking about the ground for the Army coming down to 470, I think, 1,000, and it just keeps dropping lower and lower and lower. And again, after already taking $487 billion out of the military, then sequestration would be another $500 billion. Already we have a hollow force, and so it is really a serious thing that's going on, and people are just not aware of it. Okay, anything else that anybody has that? you're being notoriously quiet.
Well, we have the second best unkept secret in the state of Oklahoma with Baker's Hangar. And we'd like to have you and the crew go down and take a look at rebuilding a Curtis Jenny.
Oh, really?
It's open.
Yeah.
It's going to take it unassembled
Yeah.
up to Oshkosh and just 2 P-51s.
Wow.
If you'd like to go down, it's just right there.
Yeah, I'd like to do that when we're in the car. I don't know where we're going from here,
Yes,
Cale.
yeah, we have time.
Do we? Yeah, I'd like to do that. I'd like to do
And
that.
everyone here's invited to go to.
You know, we,
Take your time if you've not been there.
Do you all know what Oshkosh is? See, it's the largest annual air show in the world. And my two sons and I have gone for 34 consecutive years. We have not missed an Oshkosh show. And the son I had who was killed in a plane crash a couple of months ago, he had taken, I didn't bring my Grumman today, I flew that yesterday. He had taken his younger son up to Oshkosh. He's an instructor, like I'm an instructor. And he taught his son, and he soloed on the way to Oshkosh in the Grumman Tiger this last year in the same airplane that I soloed him 34 years ago on the way to Oshkosh. Isn't that something? Yeah. And by the way, those of you who are, it's always awkward when there's been a death in the family. I have no doubt this what we're going through right now is a wink of time. And I'm going to be talking to Perry before too long. So that's good. We have that assurance. Okay. All right. If we do have time, I'd like to go down and see what they're doing down there. Yeah. Okay. Well, you guys, I want you to know that you're really doing the Lord's work. You're awful quiet today. I'm surprised at that, but good help is on its way. I mean, I really mean that. I don't know who people say. Who do you think will be in the front row when it comes to a Republican running for president? I know the frailties, the problems we had in our last two candidates, John McCain and, of course, Mitt Romney. But we're going to have somebody that will be maybe the governor of Wisconsin, who's done just incredible things. It'll be someone who will really be good, and he'll have a majority in the House and the Senate, and good things are going to happen, just like they're happening with you in Oklahoma. Okay. Yeah, the handout here, I hadn't seen that yet. I guess you got it before I did.
Do you have one?
No, I don't want to.
We have a lot of them.
Okay, you guys. Any more questions before I go down and look at the Jenny? You bet. Thank you.